Don't touch her!" His voice thundered through the empty platform, echoing off broken tiles. The stepmother's hand froze mid-air, her eyes wide with guilt. His daughter pressed into the cold wall, trembling, cheeks streaked with tears. Silence fell around them, heavy and sharp, broken only by the ragged breath of a frightened child. The shipyard lay in silence, broken only by the creak of rusted cranes swaying against the night wind. Cargo containers stacked like tombstones cast long shadows across the wet concrete. He moved through them with deliberate steps, coat collar raised, face hidden beneath the brim of his cap. He hadn't returned in his jet, no cameras flashing, no headlines announcing his arrival. This was different. This was personal. Every echo of his footsteps seemed too loud, yet no one turned to see him. Dock workers, tired and unaware, smoked cigarettes by the water's edge, paying him no mind. He kept his distance, eyes sharp, searching for the one thing money couldn't buy, truth. In his hand was a worn leather bag, nothing of luxury, just papers and the weight of suspicion. He had left behind the polished mansion, the silk sheets, the empty dinners. Here, among oil stains and salt air, he felt closer to answers. The closer he came to the locked office by the pier, the heavier his chest grew. Somewhere inside those walls, hidden from the world, was proof of what had been done to his daughter. Tonight, he swore, the lies would finally bleed into light. The bus depot buzzed with restless noise, engines coughing, brakes hissing, travelers dragging suitcases across cracked tiles. Yet in the middle of that chaos, she clung to his sleeve with tiny fingers, her body stiff, her eyes darting at every stranger who passed. He bent low, thinking she might ask about food or home. Instead, her lips barely moved, teeth clenched tight. "She hurts me when you're gone." The words struck harder than any blow. For a moment he froze, breath caught, his mind searching for meaning he already knew. His daughter's face was pale, cheeks blotched red, not just from the cold. She looked older in that instant, as if fear had stolen her childhood piece by piece. Around them no one noticed. A mother scolded her child near the ticket booth. A guard shouted about schedules. People rushed, blind, deaf to the secret tearing his world apart. He pulled her closer, shielding her from curious glances, though none came. "Who?" he whispered, though his gut already screamed the answer. She didn't say her name. She didn't have to. Her eyes shifted back toward the mansion she dreaded returning to, and his chest filled with fire he could no longer contain. The scrapyard smelled of oil and rust. Metal mountains piled against the night sky. Sparks flew from a welding torch in the distance, lighting the worn face of a mechanic who had been working these grounds longer than anyone could remember. He spotted the Millionaire moving between wrecked cars and broken engines, a man out of place in a world of grease and steel. "Check the lockers," the mechanic muttered, wiping his hands on a rag. His voice was low, like he was spitting out a secret that could cost him. "She's hiding more than bruises." The words dug deep, heavier than the stink of fuel in the air. The Millionaire froze, eyes narrowing. The old man didn't explain further, just tilted his head toward a rusted row of metal lockers leaning against the fence. Doors scarred with dents, paint flaking away. Each step toward them felt slower, like the ground itself resisted. His daughter's whisper still burned in his ears. "She hurts me when you're gone." Now here was a stranger confirming the nightmare, pointing toward proof. He reached the first locker, hands trembling, metal handle cold against his skin. Behind those doors, he sensed, wasn't junk. It was truth, waiting to cut him open. The locker door screeched as it opened, rust flaking onto his hands. Inside, beneath a tangle of rags and broken tools, lay a folder sealed with dust. He pulled it free, heart pounding, and unfolded the yellowed pages. At the top, his father's signature curled across the paper. But the strokes were wrong, jagged, nothing like the man's steady hand. It was a will. Line after line stripped away everything his father once promised, leaving his daughter's name erased, her future stolen. The fortune had been redirected, carefully crafted to funnel power to the stepmother. His throat tightened as he traced the fake ink. And it wasn't just abuse, it was theft, betrayal written in legal ink. He had suspected cruelty. Now he saw greed sharpened into something far darker. Holding the paper under the scrapyard's flickering light, he realized this wasn't just a family wound. It was war. The carnival grounds were a graveyard of joy, rides rusted to skeletons, prize booths torn apart by wind and time. The Ferris wheel stood crooked against the night sky, half its cars dangling like broken teeth. He stepped into the open, Will clutched in his fist, the paper shaking though his grip was iron. From the shadow of the stage beneath the Ferris wheel, she emerged. His stepmother's heels cracked against the wooden boards, her smile sharp enough to cut. She looked nothing like a grieving widow, nothing like a woman cornered. She looked untouchable. "Do you think money makes you safe?" She laughed, the sound bouncing off rusted metal and echoing through the dead carnival. Her eyes glimmered with a madness only greed could fuel. He held up the will, voice raw. "This forgery ends tonight." Her smirk widened. "You really believe paper will save you?" She snapped her fingers, and figures shifted in the shadows, her men waiting, loyal to her lies. The Ferris wheel groaned in the wind, metal screaming, as if the place itself knew the battle had only begun. The abandoned cinema smelled of mildew and dust, its velvet seats rotting in rows, curtains shredded by rats. He burst through the heavy doors, footsteps echoing, chasing the blur of the stepmother's driver. The man darted between broken chairs, flashlight beam cutting through the haze like a blade. "Stop!" he shouted, voice bouncing against the hollow walls. The driver didn't slow, leaping over fallen boards, scattering decades of silence with every stride. His lungs burned, but anger pushed him forward. A stumble. Papers slipped from under the driver's arm, a folder spinning across the aisle before sliding under a cracked screen. He dove, snatching it before the man could double back. The weight of the folder felt heavier than steel. He flipped it open under the dim glow of a torn exit sign. Names, birthdates, family ties, all rewritten. Every page bled with lies, signatures forged, histories rearranged. His daughter's name appeared, then vanished again beneath layers of ink. By the time he looked up, the driver was gone, swallowed by the darkness. But it didn't matter. The folder in his hand screamed louder than footsteps. It was proof of a past stolen, and of secrets still buried. His hands trembled as he turned the brittle pages, dust rising with every flick. At first, the files repeated what he had already uncovered. False wills, forged signatures, names twisted into lies. But then, buried beneath layers of correction fluid and retyped lines, a truth slipped through. His daughter's name wasn't the only one. A second name surfaced. A boy, same mother, same blood. Erased as if he had never taken a breath. The ink was scratched, overwritten, but the pattern was clear. His daughter wasn't alone in her suffering. Somewhere out in the world, or hidden by force, she had a brother. His chest tightened, the revelation colder than the wind whistling through the broken cinema roof. What had they done to him? Was he alive, lost, abandoned? Or worse, buried without a trace? He pressed the folder to his chest, his daughter's face flashing in his mind. She thought she was unloved, unwanted. She didn't know her bloodline carried more than her own pain. It carried a stolen connection, a bond cut with scissors and greed. This wasn't just about protecting her anymore. It was about uncovering the child they had buried in lies and bringing him back to light. The river roared beneath the moonlight, swollen from rains, its current fast and unforgiving. He stepped into the water, the cold biting straight through his boots. The folder pressed hard against his chest. His daughter clung to his back, arms wrapped tight around his neck, her breath quick and shallow against his ear. Behind them, engines revved. Headlights swept across the far bank, slicing through the dark like hunting eyes. Shadows moved, her men searching, guns glinting faint under the beams. One wrong step, one splash too loud, and they would be spotted. He pushed forward, legs burning as the current pulled, each stride a fight against the drag. The girl whimpered, but he whispered over his shoulder, "Hold on. Don't look back." His teeth chattered from the cold, but his voice carried steady, a shield against her fear. Halfway across, the water rose to his waist, threatening to rip the folder from his grip. He lifted it high, refusing to let the proof sink. Pages soaked at the edges, but the truth remained. On the opposite bank, mud clung to his steps as he pulled himself and the child free. The headlights faltered, lost in the mist, while he vanished into the trees with the future still in his arms. The refugee camp stretched across the muddy field, rows of canvas tents rippling in the wind, lanterns glowing faintly against the dark. Smoke from cooking fires hung in the air, mixing with the cries of children and the shuffle of tired feet. He moved quietly among them, carrying his daughter close, blending into lives stripped bare by loss. They found a corner beneath a patched tarp, the ground damp but hidden from prying eyes. He wrapped his coat around her small shoulders, though his own body shivered beneath the night. For a moment, silence pressed between them, broken only by the coughing of a baby in a nearby tent and the low murmur of strangers sharing bread. She looked up at him, eyes wide, voice no louder than a breath. "Will she find us here?" His throat tightened. He wanted to say no, to promise her safety, but his chest trembled with a truth he couldn't give. He pulled her close, his lips brushing her hair, whispering, "Not tonight. Tonight you're safe." But even as the words left him, his eyes scanned the shadows. The stepmother's reach had stretched far already. And he knew this shelter was only a pause in the storm. The prison yard reeked of sweat and iron, fences crowned with barbed wire, cutting the grey sky into jagged lines. He stood across from the family's old lawyer, the man's orange jumpsuit hanging loose on his thin frame, but his smile sharp as ever. Shackles clinked when he leaned closer, eyes glinting with poison. "You think you know the truth?" the lawyer sneered, voice carrying over the clang of gates. "But tell me, whose child is she really, yours, or your father's mistake?" The word struck harder than chains. For a moment he couldn't breathe, the folder of papers heavy at his side. His daughter's face flashed in his mind, her small voice confessing pain he hadn't seen. Now this man threatened to strip her of the only thing she clung to, belonging. "You lie," he growled, fists tight, but doubt slipped in like cold rain. The lawyer leaned back, still smirking. "Fight if you want. But if the bloodline's broken, what's left to protect?" Silence clamped down around them, broken only by the crow of a distant guard. He turned away, but the question followed him like a shadow. "Would you still fight if the bloodline was broken?" "Comment your answer." The letter smelled of mildew, its edges curled from years of hiding. He unfolded it under the dim prison light, every word carved like a blade. At first it read like another legal statement, sterile and dry, but then the lines cut deeper. His breath slowed as the truth revealed itself. It wasn't his fortune. It had never been. The estate, the accounts, the vast empire, all of it was tied not to his name but to hers, his daughter. The little girl trembling at bus depots, whispering her fears in secret, was the true heir. His stepmother's cruelty had never been random. It was strategy. By erasing the child from records, by forging wills, she had been choking out the rightful bloodline while he lived blind in luxury. His grip tightened until the paper nearly tore. The lawyer's mocking smile made sense now. The boy he thought was the heir had been nothing more than a distraction. All along the power belonged to the child no one believed mattered. Tears stung his eyes, not from losing wealth but from the weight of what his daughter carried without knowing. The fight wasn't about his name anymore. It was about giving her back everything stolen. The mountain cabin smelled of pine and smoke, its wooden walls groaning in the wind. For the first time in weeks, he thought they might have found a place untouched by her reach. His childhood friend had welcomed him with a firm handshake, a fire already burning in the stone hearth, and warm blankets for his daughter. She slept quickly, curled beside the flames, her face finally soft, free from fear, if only for a moment. But as midnight deepened, he noticed the friend's nervous glances, the way his hands shook when pouring another drink. The silence felt wrong, too heavy. Then came the low hum of an engine outside, headlights sweeping through the cracks in the shutters, slicing through the dark woods like blades. His stomach dropped. He rushed to the window. The car that crawled up the dirt road wasn't random. It was hers. His stepmother had found them. He turned to his friend, betrayal clear in his eyes. "How you called her?" The man's lips trembled, excuses caught in his throat, but the truth was already written in the light spilling across the cabin walls. Outside, doors slammed. Shadows moved. The refuge he trusted had become a trap, and the fight was at his door again. The storm shelter rattled as rain hammered the tin roof, each strike a drumbeat of chaos above their heads. Water leaked through cracks, dripping onto the dirt floor where they huddled in the flicker of a lantern. His daughter sat against the wall, knees pulled to her chest, her small frame shaking with sobs she could no longer hold back. "Why don't you let me go?" she cried, her voice raw, echoing louder than the storm itself. "Everyone says I don't belong." Her words stabbed deeper than any knife. He reached for her, but she pulled away, burying her face in her arms. He wanted to tell her she was wrong, that she was his, that nothing could change it. But his throat locked. Choked by all the lies he had uncovered, the lantern's flame wavered, shadows stretching across her wet cheeks. His silence filled the space, heavier than thunder, louder than the pounding rain. He clenched his fists. Knowing his hesitation cut her deeper than the stepmother's hand ever had. Lightning flashed through the broken slats above, illuminating her tear-streaked face. She looked so small, so convinced of her own unworthiness, and he hated himself for not finding words strong enough to fight the storm inside her. The lighthouse loomed over crashing waves, its spiral staircase twisting into the night. Wind howled through the broken windows, rattling the rusted railing as he climbed higher, his daughter's frightened cries echoing from below. At the top, beneath the flickering beam that swept across the black sea, she waited. The stepmother, her coat whipped in the storm, hair plastered against her face, but her smile was steady, cruel. In her hand a blade caught the lightning, flashing white with every strike of the sky. "You think you've won," she hissed, cornering him against the railing. "You think papers and whispers can undo me?" He stood his ground, though the wind pushed hard, sea spray stinging his eyes. "It ends tonight," he said, voice strained but unshaken. She lunged, the knife slicing air. He grabbed her wrist, steel biting inches from his chest. The storm roared around them, waves pounding against stone as their struggle rattled the tower. Below, his daughter screamed his name, the sound tearing through the gale. His grip faltered, the railing groaned, and for a moment it was only three hearts suspended between steel and sea, truth, lies, and the fragile thread holding them all. The wind tore at his clothes as he dug into his coat, pulling free a crumpled envelope, its edges damp from rain but the words inside untouched. He ripped it open and hurled the pages at her, the sheets scattering in the stormlight. They slapped against her chest, the ink bleeding but legible enough to wound. Her eyes darted over the lines, her own handwriting staring back at her, every word a dagger. The note spelled out her plan in detail, how she would plant jewels in his daughter's room, how she would call the police, how she would brand the child a thief. Not to gain money, she already had it, but to break the girl so badly that no one would ever believe her truth again. "You wrote it," he shouted, his voice cutting through the storm. "Every lie, every trap, it's yours." For the first time her smirk faltered. The mask of control slipped, her eyes wide, her breath quick. She tried to speak, but the wind carried only fragments of excuses. The lighthouse beam swept across her face, exposing the cracks of fear. She wasn't untouchable anymore. She was cornered by her own words, and the world would see her as she truly was. The desert night shimmered with heat still rising from the cracked road, the silence shattered by the wail of sirens. Red and blue lights spun across the sand, painting the checkpoint in violent color. Dust swirled as police trucks skidded to a stop, doors flung open, boots pounding against the earth. Her black car was boxed in, engines roaring on all sides. She stepped out in fury, her voice sharp, commanding, like she still owned the ground beneath her. "Do you know who I am?" She spat, eyes blazing with arrogance. But the officers didn't hesitate. Hands seized her arms, forcing them behind her back as she thrashed and cursed, her hair whipping into her face. The desert wind carried her screams, but no one listened. From a distance he stood with his daughter clutched against him, the folder of proof in his grip. Every paper, every signature, every lie now sealed her downfall. Her empire, built on bruises, fraud, and silence, collapsed in the dust under flashing lights. The men who once followed her stood frozen, powerless, watching their queen stripped of her crown. She looked up through the chaos, eyes locking with his one last time. For the first time, fear, not pride, filled her stare. The ship cut across black waters, its deck slick with salt spray, lanterns swaying against the endless dark. He leaned on the railing, his daughter beside him, her small frame wrapped in a borrowed blanket. The sea wind tangled her hair, carrying the faintest tremble in her voice as she finally asked the question that had been clawing at her since the whispers, the papers, the doubts. "Do you still want me?" Her words were fragile, almost lost to the waves, but they struck harder than any storm. He turned, kneeling to meet her eyes. The girl who had been beaten, lied to, nearly erased. She stood there bracing for rejection, as if love could be stolen by ink on forged pages. He pulled her into his arms, pressing a kiss into her tangled hair. "You are mine," he whispered, his voice breaking. "Always." Her grip tightened around his neck, tears soaking into his collar, but her breathing steadied for the first time in weeks. The sea roared, the night pressed in, yet on that deck, wrapped in the only truth that mattered, she finally believed she wasn't a burden. She was wanted. She was his. Forever. The art museum was hushed, its marble floors echoing with the soft steps of reporters gathering beneath vaulted ceilings. Paintings of kings and martyrs stared down from gilded frames, their silent eyes watching another kind of history unfold. He stood at the center, his daughter at his side, the folder clutched in his hand. Flashes erupted as cameras focused on him, the weight of expectation pressing heavy. With steady breath, he laid the papers on the podium, one by one. The forged will, the altered birth records, the blackmail note stained by stormwater but still clear. Proof not of rumor but of fact. Gasps rippled through the room. Reporters leaned forward, pens scratching, shutters clicking. The lies that had once been whispered in shadows were now illuminated under the quiet glow of museum lights. He spoke only once, his voice low but sharp. "These were used to erase my daughter. Tonight the truth restores her." His daughter gripped his hand, her small fingers locking around his. For the first time she stood tall in public, no longer the secret child of a broken home. Justice didn't echo in a courtroom that night. It rang beneath painted saints, immortal as art itself. The night had finally gone quiet. No sirens, no shouting, no footsteps chasing them through shadows. Just the soft hum of city lights beyond the museum steps and the steady rhythm of his daughter's breath against his chest. She clung to him as if letting go meant losing everything all over again. He held her tighter, one arm wrapped around her small shoulders, the other resting gently against her tangled hair. For a long moment, he couldn't speak. His throat was thick, his chest burning with every memory of the lies, the bruises, the papers meant to erase her. All the wealth in the world felt worthless compared to this fragile truth standing in his arms. Finally, his voice broke through, raw and trembling. "Blood doesn't make us family. Love does." She looked up, eyes shimmering, searching his face as if afraid he'd take the words back. But his tears fell, soaking into her hair, proof no document could ever deny. The camera lens pulled back slowly, framing them against the quiet night. Father and daughter, not bound by ink but by something stronger. For more stories of truth and survival, subscribe Bhoom Stories now.